Welcome back to the Aviation RC Noob Podcast. You found us. My name is Joe.
And I'm Matt.
We're here to be with you along your journey and to share our experiences in RC aviation. If you have any questions, thoughts, or want to share a flight story, hit us up at aviationrcnoob@gmail.com. Now, buckle in. Let's take off.
All right, episode 9, Transmitters. We made it, Joe.
Yes, we did.
So before we get into the transmitters, we always like to talk about what we've done in the hobby. Who'd like to go first?
Why don't I go ahead and go first because it'll be pretty quick, and I know you've got some exciting things that you were up to.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so not a whole lot on my end in the last 2 weeks. Been doing some more behind the scenes and logistical things.
Okay.
Work had me going. It's it's at the end of the month. Sometimes those get a little hectic, and then you and I have been talking a lot about things moving forward with the podcast and what we're wanting to do. So, been a lot of time wrapped up in that, and I have printed plans for the Spitfire. I'm going to try to spend a few nights this week working on cutting parts and hopefully getting together. If all goes super well, I may be trying to fly that Saturday. But we'll just have to see how that goes.
That'd be awesome. I'll have to go out and pick up some streamers. Just in case.
Yeah, because you and I did talk. If I get it built in time, I may drive up to see you and do the maiden. And if the maiden goes well, we'll tie some streamers on the back and go at it.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. That'd be a lot of fun. Because is that pretty much covering what you've been up to?
Yeah, more or less. Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say it brings me more to what we were doing today and over the last week. The kids have come home and they're back in school, and I really haven't been doing a whole lot of building. Like Joe, you had mentioned that we've been doing a bunch of kind of behind the scenes stuff with the podcast. And I still have been stonewalled by this Viking landing gear, but that's literally all I need to do is get that darn stuff finished. So with that tucked to the side and me trying to keep the general downstairs work surfaces clean and available for the kids to do any schoolwork or anything like that, as well as do some of my my work at home stuff, I have not taken the time I should to clean my shop so I can use that. So I've been sort of keeping it low profile. So which means I'm relegated to pretty much flying either really small planes or flying planes that I have built and ready. And that's the Spitfire is just the go-to craft at this point for me. I also have the glider, so the FT Simple Soar that I've got built. And I found out today that I think the tail is just too darn waggly. And I was trying to get my son, my youngest, to buddy box with me on the glider. I figured we'd bring it up to height, I'd cut the throttle, and then I'd pass the controls to him, and he would just kind of, fly around the sky and have some fun with it. But I could not get that to fly level or straight. It wanted to go nose down in general, and it wanted to turn ways that it had no business trying to turn. So I realized, okay, that's not the plane. But the good news was I did have the Spitfire also set up on the buddy box from stuff we did earlier that week. I put together a video about it, so I'll shameless plug for my YouTube channel is basically I posted that video there, what I'm about to talk about here. And it pretty much covers the journey of me trying to get a buddy box set up for my kids, specifically for my oldest son, who, when he came back, again, I was trying to keep the table surfaces clear, so I pretty much just had a transmitter and some of the cords and all that stuff. And so we were talking about simulators last time. So I had like Phoenix RC, and I think I had Real Flight 7.5 up, and we were kind of playing with it. And I said, "Hey, look," he's like, because they were grounded for computers. I said, "Look, the only computer you can play is a simulator." And they're like, "Oh, do we have to?" And uh, so I said, yeah, you have to. If that's what you're going to do, I'm going to at least have it maybe go for something. But then I talked to them about, why I wanted them to at least give it a go and take it somewhat seriously. And it's still kind of a game and should still be fun. Um, so I set up the Spitfire, knowing that the one that I built, the FT Spitfire, is a great flyer. And it was pretty much like once I figured out how to buddy box it, I was ready to go. So he takes it, and I go off and do some stuff, but when I'm coming back, he's flying around the sky. He's doing a couple wacky maneuvers, but he's recovering from them. And I was like, hey, he might be able to actually take the Spitfire up in the sky,
Okay, so this
for
was him
real.
flying in the simulator.
Yeah, in the simulator. And so after
Okay.
looking at that, I'm like, you might be ready to actually let me get the bunny box going. And when I do, we're going to go out to the field, and we're going to get you flying it. So I spent, little bits of time here and there to try to get the buddy box together. I'd reached out to some of our listeners on the Discord channel, who one of them has, I think I was using it. I'm connecting the T16 that I have, and we'll talk about all the different transmitters. But the jumper T16 with the jumper T8 SG. So it's basically like the smaller brother version of the T16.
Yeah.
It is they both are multi-protocol. They're both the same company. They connect with just an audio jack, headphone jack,
Mm-hmm.
basically. Um, and so I had a bunch of that stuff laying around, and I had already set it up for my girlfriend, and we flew her glider a little bit, and so I knew the buddy box was pretty much set up, but I wanted to get it like really set. I wanted to get the throttle cut and the different rates going because that's really important. And if I could do flaps, it might make things even more fun out in the field. So I got it set up. And I got a little bit of help to do it really quick. It would have taken me forever, but one of the guys reached out. I said, "How did you set it up with your deal?" He's like, "Okay, here's what you got to do. Go into this, do the thing, set the voice for this, do mid channels here. And yes, you're going to have to add to each aileron, elevator, and rudder. You're going to have to add the 3 different settings for the rates. And each one you're going to have to make like a separate line for the 100%, 70, and 50% rate cuts, which is what I was aiming to set up, because you're just going to have to do it. But it's easy. Once you get the one set up, I told him, I said I'd already built the rate profile, which is basically the curve. I already built the curve, not that hard. And he said, "Oh, okay. Yeah, well, if you have that, that'll be really easy." So he kind of showed me how. And then he gave me the tip that with the throttle cut, you are basically making a switch force the throttle channel to negative 99, which is the low value, right?
Okay.
0 is the middle value of any of the channels, right? 100 is top, negative 100 is the bottom. So it basically forces it to the bottom when you have that switch put up. He says you have to do that. Oh, and don't forget to click the OpenTX stuff at the very right side of the listing for the what switches do. There'll be a box, and you have to check the box. If you don't check the box, it says maybe you're not ready to use it. I don't know. It's just one of those things that if you think you get it all set up and you're cool, it's good, and you test it and you're like, that's not working. Why is that? It might be the box on the right. Okay. So anyway, so I got that all set up and I tested it at home and I was like, yes, this works. This works. It's good. It's good. I can't wait for the day. And of course, in North Carolina and South Carolina, which is where we've been living, it's like every single day at clockwork, like clockwork, between 3 and 6 o'clock, it rains like somebody unzippered the bottom of a cloud and just let it fall out. And, it's just been forever for it to be just a nice, calm day with not a ton of water. I could have flown it all morning, but I'm working and the kids are in school, so
Yeah.
um, Afternoon comes around and it's like too late. Darn it. And of course the kids are back and they're getting to actually hang out with their friends outside and playing ball all outside. So they're really excited about that. I'm not going to interrupt that. So, but Friday came around this past Friday. I said, you know what, kids? I don't care what you're doing. Daddy needs to go fly a plane. So you're coming with. Would you like to fly with me? I said, I've got a buddy box going, and I think you're ready, Quinn. I saw what you were doing. He's like, "Ooh, you did?" I'm like, "Yeah, I saw what you're doing. So you did a good job." I said, "I think the buddy box basically, when you get out of control, and you're not really sure what to do. It um, it allows me to take control back and kind of straighten out the plane for you and kind of get it set up again at a higher altitude, and then I can give it back to you. And then you can, do your best to fly it around. And if you get in trouble again, I'm still there. Now we don't have to worry about crashing a plane. And if we crash it, then that's both you and me. It's on both of us, mostly me. So don't worry about it. I said, I love the Spitfire. It's great, but it's easy to build and we could do it again. Um, so that being said, um, he said, okay, cool, that sounds great. So we went out there on Friday, and on Fridays that's usually when they mow the lawn at my field, and we had a couple guys out there mowing the field, and they had a puppy, which it's a big farmer's field, so I'm not surprised. The puppy was adorable. But I'm sitting there going like, and the Spitfire releases from the hand so nice. I wasn't thinking too much about it, except I knew that I had taken the settings from the transmitter, the radio link transmitter that I have, the orange one, and I'd done my best to duplicate it with the Jumper T16 and the OpenTX system, right? That's the software on the transmitter itself.
Right.
And I knew that I could have it wrong, and who knows what might actually happen. It's like I can say, I know the airframe works. I know that all the stuff is in there to make it work right. And I know it flies well if only the controls are the way they're supposed to be. So I went out there, I released it, and I think I had the ailerons backwards. I think either like when I plugged it in, I plugged them in reversed. So the channel 6 was channel 1 and 1 was 6 or whatever it was that they were set up on. And when I tried to pull out of it, basically turned to the right pretty hard and banked. And I tried to pull out, and I think it actually went harder. And I was like,
That
oh
makes
no.
sense.
Right. And like, no, I think I got it backwards. But meanwhile, I like pick it up and I look and I'm like, I think I cracked the firewall. Okay. Well, it's still pretty sturdy. Like maybe it'll be okay. But at that point, I realized, and then I went to the other piece. I had pulled out a design that I've been working on, a secret, I'll call a secret one. But basically, it's a little fatty of a pretty popular craft that I think um, I, I just wanted to test to make sure it works good before I kind of release plans and put a build log and all that kind of stuff on it. Um, and so I brought it out there, and of course I forgot the battery at home. Like I had a
Ah,
battery all set up, all charged, ready to go, and it's sitting on the table. So I was like, oh, it just wasn't meant to be. So all right, boys, and that was a matter of like 10 minutes. We were out there, we set up. The sunlight was going down, and it just didn't work. So I said, all right, we packed it up. And then we came back the next night. So Saturday
so I
night,
do,
we go out there. What?
so I do want to ask you a question real quick about that, about your flipped ailerons.
Yeah.
Did you do your pre-flight?
Not then, because we were rolling and like I'm looking at the sunlight. Literally, the sun is dipping down below the trees as we're driving out to the site. I'm sitting there like, dude, we're not gonna have any time. Like always rushing, it seems. And that was because I told my son, I said, you can play with your friends, but I need you back by a certain time. And of course, they didn't come back in time. And then they all ate really slow for dinner. And I was like, oh man, you guys are killing me. Anyway, so um, that just didn't work out. And I don't think I checked my crap, I think as they call it, or I didn't do the high five method. And well, consequently, I went back and I looked at it, and sure enough, it was backwards. I was like,
Hmm.
darn, that's an easy fix. I can do that. And I fixed it. And then we went out the next day, and I let it go, and I think I plugged in. I swore I checked the battery before I plugged it in, but I plugged in like a battery that had no voltage left. So I rolled it up and so, and you'll see in the video, it just goes and then it just kind of drifts off down to the ground, which again, it wasn't a hard hit or anything, but with the broken firewall, the prop hit at a perpendicular angle and just ripped the whole motor right off. Firewall, everything just burnt. And I was like,
Those are the worst.
oh. Yeah, I just like, okay, that's a simple fix. But that is definitely done for today. For some reason, I guess because it's that gray APC electric prop, it definitely it's a lot stiffer. So it took the hit and transferred it directly to the motor. And I think that might be some of it. I'm used to the props that those cheap ones that you and I have a bunch of, and basically if it just like touches the ground or like there's a gentle breeze near the ground, it like they break. Um, So, all right, that's the long version. So after that, I tried I brought out the battery for that little fat little chibi cute looking little tiny plane. Um, I was like, yeah, this is gonna be awesome.
When we
And
get done with this, you're going to have to show it to me.
I'll show it to you right now as we talk. Um, that's this. So you've seen it before, I
Oh,
think.
right. Okay, I got you.
Yeah, yeah. So, but as you can see, it got eaten a bit in that flight. So I had it and I just couldn't get it in the air. I was like, oh, is it balanced right? I don't know. I mean, this is where everything says this is where it should balance. So I gave it another go. And so the way this is, it's like a pusher slot prop. And so the motor is right in front of because it's short. So the motor is right in front of the controls. So anything that the controls are doing is getting the full prop blast. And so it is incredibly touchy. It's already short coupled, but it's incredibly touchy. And I did not dial down any rates. So
Oh, that's nice.
yeah, I mean, why would I do that? I'm the most amazing pilot you've ever seen, I guess.
Why
Uh,
would you even have to consider that?
I know, right? Clearly, I can take care of this. I'm a pro pilot. No. So I don't know what I was thinking, but I didn't have any rates on that model set up, which kind of stunk. So I was like, okay, failure, a couple different failures. And what I was trying to do was keep the throttle as low as possible and get it into the air because I knew the more throttle I had, the harder it would be to control it. I finally decided to just gun it. But I mean, it already landed a couple different times. There's a couple things I learned about the black foam board you get from Dollar Tree. Um, the lamination isn't as strong as the white Adams foam board. It delaminates a lot easier. So consequently, the plane is like as I'm hitting the ground, trying to get it like to stay in the air, it's the motor is eating into the actual craft because it's a slot. And so it's just like the motor's slamming in a little bit and it's ripping apart the plane. And I'm noticing there's more wiggle. And on that second hit, I saw I have one of those linkage stoppers, right? But the nuts on those just always come off. And it's easy enough to like if you have hot glue to just kind of hot glue it in place and it'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't do that, and so the nut backed itself out and dumped off somewhere in the lawn. And so this thing's wiggling around. I'm like, screw it. I just put it in there. I get the motor. I shove that in, so it's in the slot, and it's pretty sturdy. And so I'm like, forget it. I'm not. No, we're not. I'm gonna barely touch it. I'm gonna gun. I'm gonna give it plenty of throttle, and I'll get this thing flying. I swear. And so off it goes, and it takes off the table, and it's this. Have you ever seen a beetle fly?
Yes.
Like one of those heavy beetles where it's like barely making it and
Mm-hmm.
it's wiggling all over the place. And it's like, whoa, like it's drunk or something. Well, that's how this thing flew. Again, if I had the rates, I think it would actually flown really well. But this plane had already been damaged and had, I don't know, it was not as tight a build as it was when I started. So So needless to say, eventually it ended up dumping into the dirt, and at that point there was so much damage to it. I said I'm going to need a glue gun and some serious tape, or sections to cut out and kind of rebuild before I get back at this again. But I did give it a flight of probably about a second and a half, which gave me about 50 to 65 feet or so. Um, to prove that it does fly. And if my rates were down, or I had a suggestion that basically instead of having the ailerons be the entire back length of the plane, to basically reduce them to about half on the outer edges and keep the center as like a single plate. That should work out. So I'll be doing that and making those adjustments. That's probably what I'll be doing as we go forward from here. But it had little wheels and stuff, so I was able to take off of the tabletop. It's as big as big enough where it would take off your kitchen table,
Right.
right, or your picnic table. Like that's all it needs to of a runway. So, and then I had the Synergy, and that I couldn't get off the ground, and it
Really?
plowed into yeah. Well, I was taking off the little table. Now remember how much ground speed it had to get before it actually got off the ground?
Oh, that's true.
Right. It needed a good like 25 or 30 feet run up at like full throttle to get where it needed to do. I also forgot to put the barbecue skewer to keep the motor in place. So
Oh,
the motor gunned and it pulled into the back of the plane and started eating it. So I was like, oh, and it started, and the plane's starting to get wiggly after all these hits. And, because we weren't gentle on any of the landings we had when we were together.
no.
So, yeah. So I was like, oh, shoot. And then I'm getting so frustrated and I'm starting to have a hissy fit like a first grader. It's terrible. And then I realized I'm like, oh, you know what, Matt? It's time to just put these away, go home, take a breath, you know, take a breath, go do something else for a while and come back. Because the truth of the matter was the firewall is a simple fix. It's disappointing about the little fat thing, but you saw it fly, and it's not that bad of a fix. And then the last thing is let's see, maybe rebuild the Synergy. It can't hurt. See what some hot glue does. I mean, maybe it'll kind of stiffen it back up, and you'll be able to fly it. So the next morning, and then at that point, I basically grabbed I finished the buddy box and I made sure the ailerons were going the way they're supposed to go because that's when I realized I'm like, oh, I think I got those backwards. So I fixed that later that night. I fixed up the Synergy, did some hot glue. The little baby thing is still a hot mess. It's still ripped up. I was showing Joe it. But I think with a little bit of effort this week, I should be able to have something that I could fly around with and have fun with. So the next morning we went out. It was a windless day. The sky is beautiful, pretty much bright blue, a couple, nice light clouds. Um, and so we went out to the local high school, middle school, and stood underneath the power lines because that's kind of like the don't go past this point because we really shouldn't. It's a way to kind of teach the kids about the AMA guidelines of you only fly in front of yourself and you don't fly over top or behind you.
Right.
It's good practice. Um, and so we went through the process. So I took the Spitfire, threw it in the air. I tried to get it as trimmed as possible, and I realized it just wasn't finding that happy spot where at 50% throttle, I let go of the sticks and it flies level and straight. Right? That's the ideal. So I said, okay, well, I looked at it and then I tweaked the elevator servo wire linkage thing to shorten it up a bit and get it so it's a lot closer to neutral. I went back up and I did another go around, and it was a lot closer and I was pretty set. And so basically, I brought it down to zero and kind of corrected for whatever that did. When I brought the trim from what was flying perfect to zero, I twisted the linkage to correct for that difference so that it returned back to that spot after all the trims were at zero,
Nice.
which is Right, which is ideally what you're supposed to do. But remember, this is set for 50% throttle. So anytime I go over 50% throttle, it starts to, do other things. Anyway, so once I was set, I took it one last go. I did a couple clicks of trim, and it was like hands off flying. And I knew at that point it was perfect for Buddy Box. So I brought it in. And meanwhile, Quinn has already watched me like tank this plane like two different times, get really upset, and he's like just so glad it's flying in the air. He's like, "Hallelujah!"
I heard that in the video.
Yeah, it's funny. Um, so then I took that, and then I said, okay, now that we have step one. Step one is having the plane fly correctly on my transmitter, hands off, ready to go. The next step is let's hook your buddy box in and check to make sure the surfaces are going the same direction, that they're going the same amount, and they're not doing something different. Because what I noticed when I did the buddy boxing with my girlfriend, she had the opposite rudder. So I kept
Oh,
telling her, go left. And she's like, I am. And I'm like, well, go the other way. Because I couldn't look. I was making sure it was going where it needed to go. And so once I realized that, we flipped that around and everything was fine with her. And she was like, oh, this is much easier now that we're going the right direction. So I kind of did the same kind of check. And sure enough, the ailerons were backwards at first. So we fixed that. We changed channel 1 and channel 5, I think, were the two servo channels. And we flipped them to be reversed on the buddy box transmitter. And now they were all going the same direction. So, and it was simple of all of us going like, hey, you turn yours aileron left and I turn mine aileron left, and I will flip between trainer and student, and I'll go back and forth, and we can see the surfaces move. And then we did that with all the different surfaces, and we just made sure that the throttle was going correctly, which it was. And I said, okay, well, I think we're ready. And
and
what do you think, buddy?
for
Hmm?
clarification, what you're saying stick left on both of them, flip between the two, you see the surfaces move. Uh, what you were doing with that was trying to get the two synced up and limits in place so that when you flip between the two, there really wasn't any motion. That way, you didn't
Correct.
have different amounts of input.
Right. And that way, if I'm flying a certain way and I pass it to him, it doesn't suddenly start turning left or start going up or start going down. That if I'm grabbing it from him and I know what direction he's going, I can match that stick input and then
Mm-hmm.
transfer it back to me, and it's not going to jerk around the sky. Um, yeah, it makes it for a smoother transition. And what I'm saying we pass it back and forth is basically you set up the buddy box as a switch, and I had it set up as I had um, my throttle cut was all the way up. My middle was the trainer controls, so basically the master control, and then the student control was then passed to the buddy box. So the buddy box is giving inputs to the master, which sends it out to the plane. And
Okay.
then you determine whether or not you're getting the inputs of the stick from the student or the main transmitter or the trainer transmitter.
And there's a switch on it,
Right. And
switch
I
on the
set up
master to control that.
exactly. And
Okay.
that's something you set up. And then I also had the upper position is just throttle cut. That way, worst comes to worst, you just like hit the thing, and master has it, throttle's off. We're gonna glide this one back down.
I've
Um,
got one of those switches.
yeah, yeah, and they're important. I really think that every plane should have one, because when you, even if you're just going to retrieve your plane, um, even though you have throttle down, it's easy enough while you're bending over. If you're like me, I've got a strap. So as I'm leaning over the plane, the transmitter starts swinging. It's easy enough for it to catch on something or accidentally hit something and maybe up the throttle. And if the throttle kill is on, it's unlikely to do both. So,
And
and
if
some
you're
people take
like
it.
me and have a belly of my size, you're definitely going to hit
I,
that throttle control and send it on up.
I have news for you. You don't need much of a belly to hit that. That's experience talking. Um, so yeah, just having the throttle cut is still a big help, and it's a good safety feature. Also, something when you're working on your plane, always have it facing away from you. Heaven forbid you do something when you're kind of switching channel arrangements or whatever. Oftentimes you have to cycle through your different channels. One of them will likely be your throttle. And if you have the channel switching, or your throttle channel will switch through like aileron or elevator, well, that's its default setting is the middle. It's 0. Well, the throttle at 0 is half throttle. So as you switch through those channels, it might kick it on to half throttle as a default because
Mm.
it's rolling through your aileron inputs and your elevator inputs and all that stuff, which are at 0, which is half throttle. So you want to have that kind of facing away from you. Heaven forbid, and anybody else in the area, because heaven forbid it turns on while you're doing that kind of thing. It'll at least take off away from you and not into you.
Right.
So, okay. So then got that all checked out and off we go. We put the throttle about halfway through or about 75%. I let it go. This plane I've noticed has a tendency to kick to the right in the beginning. I'm sure that has to do with motor torque and a bunch of other things, but it just basically almost takes a right turn and and then it's easy, easy enough to recover. It's flying really well. Um, and I bring it around, get it up to the height, and I say, "Okay, Quinn, are you ready?" And then, first he was like cowering behind me. He's like, "I don't know if I'm ready," and I'm like, I've watched you. You're good, buddy. You got this. Like, I know you can fly this when it's in the air. I said, okay. And I said, don't worry, I got it if you don't. You know, that's what I'm here
Mm-hmm.
for. Okay. So he goes on and, all right, ready? He's like, yeah, I'm ready. So I kicked it to him, the OpenTX is really cool. It's got a lot of sound. It's got a speaker. So the T16 has a speaker set in it, and it has a bunch of audio files that you can download and put in there. And one of them is transmitter on or trainees plane, and then another one when I kicked it to the student plane set where it basically pushed the controls or got the controls from the buddy box. When I move the stick down, it also plays the sound student plane. So it'll be trainer plane and student plane.
Okay.
And so then it passes back and forth, and I don't always have to tell him. The transmitter will notify us who's got the plane, which is a really nice feature. When I had set it up with Debbie, I didn't even know how to do that with my girlfriend. And so when I would transfer it back, I'd have to tell her. And, it's just one of those things. You may be more worried about the plane itself and how it's flying and all that stuff, and you may forget. So if you pass it or take it, you may be doing that without telling. And, it's just one of those things. It's a courtesy to make sure that everybody's kind of understanding what's happening with the plane. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a nice feature to have. So if you have it, go find it, put it in if you can, because it'll help you. So we flew around the sky a bunch. There were about two situations where I recovered it and I hit it to the throttle off position. So I was recovering it, I was controlling it, but there was no power to it. So I was like, oh, and Quinn's like, oh no, Dad, watch out, watch out. And I'm like, oh yeah, throttle, duh. And so I kicked it back to just the trainer setting, in which case I had full throttle control and ring and off, off it went and took off, and we got it fixed up. And then there's one more scenario, and in the video I kind of highlight with a little red circle because we're literally on the other side of the field, and so we're a soccer field, a stadium bleacher set with a bunch of margins, and a football field away.
Goodness.
um, but at least the football width away. Um, yeah, it's on the other side of the whole thing, so it's near that tree line. Uh, Joe, because you've been there.
Yeah.
Um, and it's this little dot, and Quinn's like, "Oh no, Dad, watch out!" And he had recovered it a couple times. Like we're dipping below the tree line, which means it's within about 40 feet of the ground, and he's out of control with it, and he's like, "Oh no!" But he recovered it, and then he got in trouble again. And he's like, "Oh no!" And I'm like, "Oh gosh, that's me." So I kicked it to the transmitter, and the trainer, and I zipped it back around, and we skimmed that. We must have been about 5 feet off the ground and more or less out of control when I took it. And we saw it just kind of like wiggle and kind of make its way back up. And it was like, oh, thank goodness. I said, well, I thought we were goner there, buddy. I thought we were goner. He's like, yeah, me too. That was so crazy. So, and then we flew the whole battery, which was really pretty neat. We had a 1300 4S battery, and we flew the whole battery. At 50% throttle, that lasts a pretty long time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so we brought it in and landed it right in front of us. We high fived, and he was just really excited. He's like, "I was so nervous, I was scared, but that was exciting. That was a great time, you know." Um, and then I asked him afterwards, like, "What do you think?" I said, "He's like, yeah, that was fun." I said, "Would you do it again?" He goes, "Yeah, definitely." So I was like, "Cool, all right, I
Excellent.
got him hooked." Yeah, yes. Now, when we go out to the field, we can all have some fun rather than them just going, "Oh gosh, do we have to go to the boring place?" You know, they
Right.
can be like, "Oh, Dad, can I bring my plane?" And I'll be like, "Well, of course. You know, let's get the batteries ready. Let's make sure everything's ready, and then yeah, let's bring it out there." So that's going to be a really fun chapter. And then to follow up, um, I was thinking about it. I'm like, I've got my glider. I said, let me get the one transmitter. I've got an extra transmitter. I bought a couple a while back because I knew with the T16, I can't hook it up to my radio link stuff. So I bought a couple receivers that'll go with the T16 and they'll talk. And so I put one of those in the glider and I was like, okay, I set it up today um, to Buddy Box because I thought that might be a better plane for my youngest because you could put the throttle off and just let it glide and it's gentle and it's going. Well, I realized I think I need to rebuild it. I think the Simple Soar fuselage has had its moment in the sun and it's time to be rebuilt. The wing still seems to be hold up just fine, but the tail is like wiggly, and that's
Hmm.
never a good sign. That's never good. So I
It
was
was
like,
never
ah,
super sturdy in the first place.
right, exactly. Uh, anyway, so then I thought, well, you know what? The Spitfire is darn good. And so we took let's see, I'm trying to think of who did it first. I think Quinn was trying it for a little bit, and then I had Logan try it, and he's the geez, he's a 9-year-old. And when he gets on the transmitter or on the simulator, he's just laughing because he's tanking all these planes, and he's like, "Hey, look at this!" Yeah, I'm like, "Son, you do realize like if you try to tank this purposefully into the ground, I'm gonna be upset. But like if we bust it, like if we mess up and we bust it, like I'm not gonna be that upset." Apparently, that was a lie. I didn't mean to have it be a lie, but apparently I was a little bit more invested in keeping the Spitfire around than I thought I was when we started today. But so we're flying around, and generally things were going pretty good. And I think I was flying with Logan, and he was doing a great job around the sky. He liked to get it inverted and try to fly. And I'm like, "What are you doing? Like that's hard for everybody." You know? And he's like, "Dad, I don't know what to do." I'm like, "I'm not sure I do either, but but we got it around." And we were having a good time just tooling around the sky, and he was having a good time. And then I got it kind of hooked up. We ran out of battery, and I got a new battery in there. And apparently, while I was doing that, I ended up unhooking because they're really short leads. Um, I ended up unhooking channel 1 and channel 5, which are both aileron controls. And I didn't mentally recover fast enough. I let it go in the air, and all of a sudden, the plane's turning, and I'm doing lazy circles, and I can't control it. Like I can't control. I don't know why can't I roll? Why can't I turn? Because I'm mentally banking yanking. And I'm like, okay, Matt, get the rudder in there. Just use the rudder in the elevator. It'll be fine. And I don't know, my brain could not handle that. And I ended up tanking it. Now, this is also in the field that they're currently spraying water on. Like there's that big giant wheel thing that's rolling around the outside of the field and it's spraying like tons of water. Like we're driving in through puddles. It hasn't
Oh
rained
man.
today. And I'm like, "Oh no, I just tanked it into all the water." But fortunately, it was built from the foam board kits, the brown paper, the water resistant foam board.
Right.
And I painted it, like I spray painted it. So with a gloss coat. So that's even more coverage, right? And turns out I thought I was gonna be out there a long time trying to find this darn plane. But Logan's like, it's over there, Dad. I know it's over that way. And, Quinn was kind of helping us line it up through the stalks and the thing. And so we got way up, a little bit up a hill and started walking across the tobacco rows. And sure as not, there's the plane. It's blue and yellow. So it's pretty clear. And I pull it out. I'm like, oh, please don't be busted, please. And you know what? The only thing that was busted was the prop.
Hey,
That was it.
that's not bad.
No, I was like, holy cow, it lives. So picked it up. We walked back. We figured out what was wrong. We plugged the things back in, got a battery in there, and Quinn took it up and he was doing just tooling around. And I did a uh, couple saves in the beginning, but after a while, I said, look, just do a couple laps, like literally just do a couple loops. Try to keep it straight and level and gentle, easy turns around the edges. I said, I know that's boring. I said, but just get to know that that's the default. Like when things are going weird, you're trying to get back to that because that's under control and that's easy. I said, and then you go and do all the crazy stuff, and then you can come back to that. And he said, well, that's like kind of hard. I'm like, right. I mean, flying level isn't the easiest, but he gave his best go and he kept flying around and he started getting them pretty well. And he was doing some rolls and loops and, because the Spitfire is just so agile. It's just so easy to do that. And he was starting to play around with the throttle. So he was, making it a little faster, doing a couple loops,
Hmm.
and he'd bring it back to like medium and where it's nice and slow, and then he was kind of getting it back to where, so he was recovering things on his own, and he had really improved even just in that one day, those handful of days of flying. He really was getting the hang of flying a lot better and a lot faster, which is really awesome. And I talked to them both and they said that was a lot of fun. I can't wait, I can't wait to do this again. So yeah, it was an awesome flying weekend, even though I hadn't done a whole lot before that.
Good. I'm looking forward to your boys being real comfortable and all four of us get to go out and fly sometime.
Oh yeah, and we're gonna have some serious combats, I'm sure. That'll be a lot of fun.
Hmm.
Cool. Um, yeah, I think that was pretty much all I was doing. So I guess the next segment is listener comments, right? Questions that we had along the way for the last couple weeks. I know, well, we had kind of a aggregator comment from like a system and a system and a system that we don't really subscribe to, but we happen to catch it. It was just a general comment about how there isn't this much, uh, to listen to about our hobby. And it was nice to see that there was at least something, though they weren't looking for our podcast. Our podcast wasn't what they were looking for. They definitely liked what they heard, and they may continue listening. That was kind of neat to hear because I know sometimes when you're looking for a podcast, you're like, I was hoping for like a cooking show, but not like cooking zombie brains. But that's interesting.
An interesting analogy.
I know. I'm
um,
sorry.
that's fine.
See,
So yeah, that comment ended up coming. I don't remember which platform I saw that on. I was doing some behind the scenes, getting us
mhm,
listed on some other platforms. And there's a lot of platforms that just seem to pull from the iTunes or the Apple Podcast or the Google Podcast, or
yeah,
they just sort of grab from everywhere and bring it on in.
hmm,
So this was not a comment that we received through any uh, methods that we monitor. Um, it was just on one of these other uh, other podcast sites. And like I said, I don't remember what it was. It was not one that I tried to get into that system and create an account and claim the podcast so that I could reply to the comment, thank the person that had left it, but it was not a setup that I could log into and claim it. It was just a platform that just grabs the RSS feeds and hosts it,
dumps it out.
or redirects it for other people. So,
Hmm.
um,
Right.
you know, if you guys do want to leave comments, um, send us an email, or you can go to we got a Facebook page that we also link in the show notes. We're through Anchor, so head over to Anchor. We can get the comments that way, or nice
Anchor.fm.
feature, yeah, Anchor.fm. You can actually, on our show's Anchor page, there's a button for recording voice messages,
Ooh.
which would be an interesting experience. If anybody wanted to try that out, we could actually have the audio, and if somebody wanted to leave a message that they didn't want to play it on the air, we could try that out and see how that went over, how that worked. And
Yeah, that'd be fun.
yeah, and yeah, that's sort of our main areas that we're monitoring. That, and then the Discord that we have set up, Discord server that we have with a couple chat channels, where we hold build nights for the guys that want to do that. So yeah, if you end up commenting, and then with Apple iTunes and such, if you're listening on that platform, feel free to leave ratings and comments.
Yeah,
I think we'll get emails off of that, but I do periodically go over there and have a look to see if there's any activity.
sure.
And speaking of activity, um, Matthew and I look at our podcast stats on Anchor, and we're we're seeing a influx of newer listeners, which is exciting. Um, it's been interesting watching episode numbers show
It's
up in
it's not
groups.
interesting, Joe. It's exciting. This is awesome. I don't
It
know.
is.
I'm jazzed about it, but and I know you are too, Joe. I know you're trying to keep it low key. I'm excited.
It is.
It's nice to see that that there are people who are enjoying what we're doing.
It is, and I am excited. What I'm saying is interesting is watching, as from our statistics, we can see. Obviously, we can't see individual people. You don't have to worry about that, but we can see as groups of episodes, or like I've been kind of watching a wave move through the episodes. People are listening through and catching up. So,
Yeah,
first, to everybody who's been with us and has been keeping up on our episodes as they release, thanks for hanging with us, and thanks for being here. Thanks for enjoying all this with us. For
yeah.
those
Thank you.
who are part of that wave that are catching up when you get here, hi, we've been waiting for you. We've seen you coming. Welcome
Yeah, welcome
aboard.
aboard.
Um, yeah, so just wanted to talk about that for a second, because this has been fun and interesting watching that over the last couple weeks. Um, and then also, while I was out and about on the web, um, doing some looking around, and this is sort of moving into our announcement section. I'll start it off, and then Matthew, you have something you want to talk
Okay.
about.
Yeah.
Um, so I spend some time on the internet and look at things and troll around, and I ended up Googling us, um, just to see like what's out there and where are we showing up and such. And um, you know, one of the things I came across was a website that was listing merch, and not just from us, but from a myriad of other platforms, myriad of other podcasts and
Podcasting platforms.
shows
Yeah.
and things like that. Right. It was a weird website, um,
Mm-hmm.
but it looked like you could buy a T-shirt or this or that,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, yeah, I did a little looking into it, but it looked sketchy from the get go. And so Matthew and I just want to go ahead and say, at this moment, we don't have any merch that's out there. We don't have any a web store, nothing like that. My first take on seeing that, once I looked into it for a minute, was that I'm more concerned that that particular site was um, looking to gather payment information, um,
And
and
scam. Yeah.
yeah, try to make away with folks' money on a larger scale than what you're thinking you're paying for a product you're not going to get. Um, so at this time we don't have anything. I just wanted to bring that up to say, if you happen to come across something, um, right now we don't have anything, and I don't want you guys. I would hate for somebody to see something and go, oh, cool, and then be putting their payment information at risk. So
Right.
if Matthew and I ever go that route, we'll let you know about it, and we'll let you know where we're doing that at, so that you know that your information's safe. We don't want anybody
Yeah.
getting compromised. Matthew, now
And
you've got
I
something,
was
right?
gonna let me add to that. And just so you
Okay.
know, I mean, if you ended up purchasing from somewhere, it's not gonna help the show. Like if we set up a purchaser, we'll get a small amount of that money. That so by purchasing a T-shirt through someone we highlight on this show, it's going to likely help this podcast. So if you choose to buy something from somewhere else, we can't guarantee it, and we certainly will not be helped by that. So, but we'll let you know if we get to that point. One of our other announcements that we wanted to make was we'd like to make an event announcement for Build Party. It's something Joe and I have talked about. We've kind of done it on our own and found that it was a lot of fun. And we ended up having a couple listeners who had already kind of been in the Discord chat join us. And I'll tell you what, it was a lot of fun. It was neat to speak to just a bunch of different people from honestly all over the place. When we looked at our listener stats, Joe was talking about them. One of the most interesting things was heck, within the first week or so, we saw somebody from Scotland. There's people listening in Australia and Germany, and as well as like all over the United States and states in general and Canada. And so, I mean, we're talking, East Coast, West Coast, in the middle, all over the place. So that's really exciting. And again, we're picking a time that's admittedly it's convenient for us, but we're hoping that that window allows for people in different locations to kind of get there. So let me give you the information. We're gonna give you a link to our Discord server. I think we're gonna put a 3-day link up, so that way anybody who is interested, it'll be in the show notes. Actually, it won't be in these show notes because that won't be
We'll
enough
put
time.
we'll put it in the show notes.
We'll put it in the show notes, and we'll also keep a lookout in Facebook because we're going to
Mm-hmm.
post it there too. And so on 9/12/2020, between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're going to be on there, and we're going to be building who knows what. I think we have a couple things we have in our mind what we want to build. But bring your computer over to your build table and sit down with us and build your stuff. Ask us questions. Ask each other questions. That was one of the neat things is you can, you know, most of us don't have families who are also in the hobby, like really into the hobby like we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you want to talk planes, you can't do it at home. And honestly, the Discord server has been for us, and part of what I think people really enjoy about the flight test forum community or RC groups or wherever you choose to kind of get your fix for your RC addiction. Um, that's one of the benefits of being there is that you get to talk to people who are also really excited about it. The great part about a build party is everybody's live. You're able to text back and forth and talk back and forth. If there's, I think the server can hold up to 25 people. We're going to, it may only be 10. I don't know. We'll figure out logistics on that in the next week specifically. Um, but if you do join, we ask that you do a push to talk. So that way, if there's any background noise, it keeps it to a minimum. But we'd love to have you come out as listeners and, just build something with us. Have a good time. Get something that you can fly in the air with us. And I think that pretty much brings us around to our topic.
Which is transmitters, and I've got mine right here.
Nice. I got mine right here too. I'm not going to turn it on. It talks to me.
Mine beeps a
Unless you.
lot.
It does. Um, but I think anybody who's in this hobby understands that, transmitters are the method with which we pilots, we like to call ourselves pilots, and we are, for us pilots to transmit our control inputs to the aircraft that's in the air remotely. So obviously we're not in there. We can't move the sticks in a plane around, so we do it remotely with radio signals. Um, I think everybody kind of understands, but we're going to go through real quick about how they work. Um, you move the sticks on your transmitter. There's a sensor in your transmitter that determines kind of what range, or like where you're at in the movement, stick movement. Within that range, the PWM signal then converts that digitally, and it goes through a chip that sends it via radio wave to your receiver. The receiver decodes that information and then passes that PWC signal control input to the servo or the ESC, as we talked about before.
Mm.
And then that then tells it either opens up the motor throttle to a certain point, or it moves the servo control arm to a designated spot, whatever corresponds to your stick. And then that signal path basically repeats ad nauseum every, I think with PWM signals like 1,000 microseconds or some such. Um, Often. Um, so that's basically how you get your information from standing on the ground up to the craft that you're flying. And so I think the next piece of that is when you're looking at transmitters. And so our goal with this is to give you the information you need to be able to select one if you haven't yet, or if you're looking for a new one, maybe some things you might want to consider when you're buying the next one. We're also trying to kind of demystify some of, I don't want to demystify, but there's a lot of differences between the transmitters, and we're going to talk about at least what we know about that, and understand that it's a rabbit hole that goes deep. If you choose to go deep, by all means, go to it. Um, so the interesting thing about transmitters is that they typically, in the United States, we have a set range that's set by the FCC that's allowed for just, I think it's recreational use or general use, and it's a small range, and it's used for a bunch of different stuff. It's 5.8 megahertz, or sorry, gigahertz, 2.4 gigahertz. We have 4.3 megahertz and 9.12 megahertz. They all can be used for transmitting data through the airwaves, transmitting information. Oftentimes they're used for garage doors. Sometimes they're used for your key fobs, is I think oftentimes 5.8. I know your routers and your internet are oftentimes 5.8. So
2.4 and 5
yeah,
gigahertz.
that's right. It does both.
Hmm.
Which also means like if you're flying in a congested area where there's a lot of households and things like that, the background noise that you're going to encounter is significantly larger than if you're flying in an open field away from a group of houses. Um, will it interfere? Probably not. But if you may, on occasion, have a very small dropout if you're flying in a neighborhood. So it's something to consider about. And oftentimes, when you see a flying field that's been, designated as such, it's rarely in the middle of a development, or a set of developments. It's because it keeps the background noise low and your signal strength and connection stronger. Um, and what you'll often find is that 5.8 in this hobby tends to be designated for FPV. 2 point, and so basically the longer the wavelength. So gigahertz is how often it goes back and forth from high to low, and a megahertz, that's fewer times. The fewer times, the longer the wavelength, and the longer the wavelength, the further it can travel, as I understand it. Maybe I got it backwards. I don't think I did.
No,
Um,
a hertz or a hertz with a Z is a measurement of full cycle in a second. So got um, you got your hertz, kilohertz, megahertz, and then you got your gigahertz, and then we don't
mhm.
really go beyond that. But that's the number of cycles or
Cycles.
number of up downs in the waves within a 1 second period. So the
So
higher
the fewer
frequency, the
the up
much
downs,
faster,
the right. The fewer the up downs, the longer the distance between those highs. So the longer the wavelength.
and the slower the frequency. Yes,
Correct.
not that it
It,
travels slower.
no, they all, and that's the thing is they all travel the same speed, and that is the speed of light because it's an electromagnetic wave. So it all travels at the speed of light, so it's going blazing fast. So you don't have to worry about that part. But the difference is the longer the wavelength, the more likely it is to penetrate through or around interferences, such as houses or trees or things like that. So you'll notice that the reason why we're using FPV footage as 5.8 is partially because when you are flying a craft and controlling it as well, and you're looking through it and then FPV footage, you want your eyesight to go before your control of the craft. You can, worst comes to worst, you can pull the goggles off, find your craft, and fly it home safe, right? Because you don't want to
Mm.
lose control of it. So you want to lose one before the other. And that's oftentimes when you see a setup, you'll have the FPV be a shorter wavelength than the controlling piece.
Also,
So,
your higher uh, your higher frequency rates are able to carry data. So
yeah,
that
because it's
that
definitely more.
5.8 is able to pack more information to a given data packet.
Okay, good. Yeah. Now, you if you've been doing this for a long time, you'll also remember. And if you look at some of the toy grade radio stuff, like my kids have a ton of robots and things like that, or those little toy jumper cars that they zoom around with like 9-volt batteries and things like that. And they've got this little kind of long wiggly antenna with a little plastic thing so you don't poke an eye out. Those are oftentimes when you look in the back, they're like 27 point something megahertz and 49 megahertz. And if you're way back in the day, the hobby used to be designated in the 72 megahertz band. And it was set up where you had 50 channels and you would plug in a quartz crystal in both the transmitter and the receiver that were tuned to the exact same frequency. And you would basically designate that you're on that frequency on like a pegboard at your club, and you would then fly your plane. The problem is there's no, and we'll talk about protocols and kind of how we can have a bunch of planes in the air not stomp on each other as far as signal. Because what it used to be was if somebody else came up with that same chipset, started their transmitter, they would be transmitting to your plane in the air. And then the transmitter would be trying to fight between who's the strongest signal to which one I listen to.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really important that like when you wanted to fly your plane that nobody else was on that signal, or you waited until that person came down and had shut off their equipment before you went and started flying your plane. So, and that's how things were done probably what 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. But there's been, we've changed the frequency, and we've also some of the microprocessors have allowed us in this hobby to start using more creative ways to send data without interfering with each other, yet still using the same bandwidth that everybody else is using, which is pretty cool. We're going to go through some of those. Oh yeah, and I think I mentioned it. There was literally only 50 slots in that 72 megahertz crystal range. So that was it. There was a total of 50 slots, and you probably would kind of jump a slot before you went to the next one, because last thing you want is for there to be any kind of interference or overlap.
Mm-hmm.
We run into that with FPV footage. When there's was it 48 channels or something? You don't want two adjacent channels because oftentimes they'll interfere with each other enough where you might be seeing your neighbor's footage instead of your own, and that becomes a real problem when you're trying to
That's a
fly.
problem. Yeah.
It's a big problem. So they're doing the same kind of thing, and there's solutions to that, and we'll talk about that when we get to the FPV footage. I'm hoping we can get somebody like Stone Blue Airlines. the guy who runs that. He does some of. He's been one of the bigger innovators, I think, in the FPV radio um, transmission and receiving um, stuff, and we can get into that later. Um, but basically, there's ways to get around stomping on each other. And so it used to be those were the crystals. And I think I'm trying to remember how, so they were universal. So it didn't matter what radio you had. If you had the crystals, you could get whatever radio you want. The universal piece was anybody could come up, and if you just gave them the crystals, they could use whatever. It didn't matter. Nowadays, it's done where each of the protocols that the transmitters use is unique, as opposed to being universal like it used to be. So
Okay.
consequently, like if you want to fly, if you have a Spectrum transmitter, you better have a Spectrum receiver, because that's the only thing that's going to talk to your Spectrum transmitter. Right?
Okay.
They talk the same language. And think of it like each one of these is basically a language that each of these transmitters talk, and they don't know how to speak anybody else's language. So you can't just pick up any receiver. You have to be really careful as to which one you're picking up. Now, most of those languages have a range of transmitters. More importantly, they have a range of receivers that you can pick from. So you're not kind of stuck to the high end. You're not stuck to, oh, I only get 4 channels to work with. Like, what the heck is this? I have a plane that has 8. This is terrible. Um, so there's usually a range, and they kind of they'll increase in channels, and at a certain point, then they'll actually have 2 antennas that receive the signal. And if you put the antenna at 90 degrees, you are less likely to lose signal because one antenna will be picking it up strong while the other one's being weak. It's about polarity and directionality and things like that. But
Mm.
ultimately, when you start getting a dual signal or a dual antenna receiver, you end up actually having a stronger reception because one of those antennas will be good, no matter what orientation your plane is. So as you get a higher price and a better receiver, they're going to have more functions. And even the higher ones have like what they call it a satellite receiver, which is you put the receiver where it belongs, but you're going to run a cord out to another receiver little piece. It doesn't have any of the channel hookups, but it receives your radio signal somewhere else in your plane. And you can set them at different spots where there might be more interference in the center where you're putting all your channel connections, because that's also where your battery is and it's creating magnetic fields. But you can take that satellite, run it out way out in the wing where there's none of that, and you'll get a lot
Okay.
clearer signal. So again, that's like as you kind of go up, most of these transmitter protocols or transmitter languages are going to have those features in the receivers as they go up. But let's talk about what kind of languages we talk. And when you're looking at these things, if you just started, you're going to be like, what does all this mean? This is all Greek. And it's Greek and German and Russian and English and all the other different kind of languages, but they go by a different name. So let's see. There's DSSS, and that's basically direct sequence spread spectrum. So it's talking about how the signal is packaged, and then how on that 2.4 gigahertz window, because we have a window of a series of slots that we can put radio signals in, about how they're put in that spectrum, right? Is it
Okay.
is it putting it just in one channel? Is it taking a couple random spots? Is it syncing up and always doing ABTSV, 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 and that's how it talks. And it says, okay, I know that we're talking ABTSV. Now the next transmitter might say, today we're going to designate BCFQ, BCFQ. So BCFQ transmitters talk to BCFQ receivers, and until you take the receiver and bind it up with the other transmitter, then you say, and the binding process is saying, well, what's the sequence, right? And we'll
Hmm.
talk about the sequence piece. But anyway, that's kind of the difference. Be like, is it randomly going across it? Is it syncing a time? Is it setting a designated pattern across those signals? And they all tackle it differently. And the naming kind of hints at what they do, but all of this is proprietary and who knows. But it's important though that when you select your transmitter, you know what it talks, what its language is, and that the receiver speaks the same thing specifically, even though they all look the darn same. They all have A, F, a bunch of S's, and a D or an H or a T. Anyway, let's keep going. So A-FHSS, that is automatic frequency hopping spread spectrum. There's that SS, spread spectrum again. Frequency hopping means that it's shifting around that spectrum. It's changing the frequencies. And that's typically done with high-tech transmitters. And I'm going to try to note which transmitter is using this thing. I don't know if anybody designated specifically for DSSS. Maybe a listener can write in and let us know what we missed there. Um,
Real quick
DSM, go ahead.
before you move on, when you say that's primarily the high tech transmitters, that's high tech brand, not high
Yes,
tech as
yes, yes.
it's fancy and high
Right, right.
technology.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's HITEC. High Tech is a brand of transmitter, and they
Okay.
use this frequency or this protocol to transmit to their receivers. Okay, that's AFHSS. Then there's DSM, and then in this family is DSM2 and DSX, and we'll talk about that. So digital spectrum modulation is DSM. Um, Basically, two the DSM2 has two signals that actually get sent as a primary and a secondary. So if you ever lose one, you have a secondary signal going out as well that it can latch onto, and you are less likely to have an interference with that one. That's part of the reason why they did it. And then X reduces the switch time to a few milliseconds so that you may never. So instead of switching, and you might have like a small gap where you notice like all of the surfaces go slack for a second and then it recovers. That's you might notice it with the DSM2, but with the DSX, it's down to a few milliseconds, and you will probably never know that you actually had a gap and a switching between one of those spectrums and the other. Okay. And that is typically, oh shoot, I don't think I put who that is. Um, Maybe you can look it up, Joe, while I continue on with the FlySky protocol. FlySky protocol is AFDHS. That is automatic frequency hopping digital spectrum. So instead of using an analog equivalent, they put it directly to digital, and it's again that automatic frequency hopping. That is one of the easiest ways to, I guess, that manufacturers have found to have a signal not if it does end up actually stomping on another signal that's already in the air, it's going to be for only one of the packets that gets sent. So you're only going to have an imperceptible gap. And that has proven to be very reliable. Let's see. Futaba, it is a radio brand, uses the FAST, FASST. So that's the Futaba Advanced Spread Spectrum Technology, and they have fast, they have faster, and fastest, which is much like the DSM, DSM2, and DSMX protocols, where the the further along that you get, they've made advances as they go, and it reduces the amount of latency. That's right. DSM is a spectrum, is the spectrum brand. I knew that, but I wanted to be sure before I stated it and put my foot in my mouth.
You're
Um,
good.
and spectrum transmitters are a lot of people really like those. They're pretty popular. So then there's let's see, the next one is the D8, D16, and the LR12. That is the FR Sky or Free Sky, I think is how it's considered. Um, so so the DX is the X series receiver. It's the regular normal series receivers. The LR12 stands for long range. Um, sorry. Yeah, it's the long LR12 is the long range. And I think FR Sky 16 and like D8 and D16 refers to, I think, the number of channels it transmits. I think D16 uses 8 PWM slots, but it also has a digital S-bus signal, so it's kind of like a truncated version as well that it'll send out the next 8 in like the last, like the gap between what is normally in the D8 signal. It's like D8 signal, it sends all the 8 channels, there's a gap, and then it sends the 8 channels again. Well, in that gap, they basically send like a compressed other 8 channels that we talked about when we talked about ESCs, about how that kind of, when they updated the protocols, they realized there's so much like gap in there they can kind of squish it. So that's Free Sky or FR Sky. I think that no, we already talked about Fly Sky. That's different. Okay, so the radio link protocol is the DSSS. They use that, so the direct sequence spread spectrum. But they also have a dual, so they also use another protocol as well, which is FHSS, and that's the frequency hopping spread spectrum. So they use the direct sequence and the frequency hopping, and they actually have two. And I guess that's a pain in the butt because nobody else copies it. Nobody's chosen to clone it. If you have Radio Link, you're the only stuff you're going to be able to use is Radio Link, which means it's going to be factory approved and quality controlled and all that kind of stuff, which is great. But it also means you don't have many options.
Hmm.
You pretty much. But I have their, and we'll talk about that. I have their transmitter. I love it. It's excellent. I think I'll tell you what my biggest gripe is, and that's probably the only reason why I pulled away from it, because otherwise I've been very happy with it. Let's see that, and then there's Devo or Deviation. They have a native which is I guess the High Sky company, and they have like a T16 native protocol. Notice the jumper transmitters. That's the T16. The jumper stuff is Deviation or Devotion. And again, they have that. But one of the interesting things, uh, let's just say that all of these talk to the transmitter in a way that limit the amount of interference that they will have with other transmitters using that same exact frequency spectrum that is designated by the FCC for RC hobbyists to use.
Mm-hmm.
So it used to be we only had 50 slots, period, because that's how many slots you could get with those crystals, and that's it. These guys, because it's not using the specifically tuned crystals, and it uses more digital technology, there's a lot more options and kind of how it slices and dices. Like I said, some of them basically when you bind, they get the internal crystals timed, their timing synced up, and they say we go on 3 and now, and then they're now in sync. That your receiver is now in sync with your transmitter, and it will just make sure that it's reading that signal correctly. Whereas other ones are basically, like I said, you basically have the letters of the alphabet. Those are the ones we use. And then some of them are saying, well, we use spectrum, the 12th band, the 16th band, the 20th band. That's what we're sending stuff on. Again, it's all that kind of stuff. What that ends up doing is that you are allowed to put way more planes in the air. And you think, okay, I'm never like I fly at my field, I fly out my backyard, like I'm never going to interfere with anybody. But it also means that when you're flying and you've got the router and a bunch of other 2.4 gigahertz gear that's stomping all over certain parts of the spectrum, your transmitter might hit that spectrum on occasion, but not always, and only for like a small packet of length. We're talking milliseconds, which means you might lose some information sent to the plane, but you will probably rarely know rarely know it because it's already moved on to the next packet at a totally different random spot that isn't hitting um, that thing that's kind of blocking a section or drowning out a section of your spectrum.
Okay.
Um, and that means that you're also not going to accidentally gain control of somebody else's plane that's on the same channel or anything like that. And if you looked at, we talk about flight tests a lot. We're like, we're not sponsored or anything. Um, but one of the things they did with their festival was that they ended up putting, I think, they got on the Guinness Book of World Records as having the most amount of remote control aircraft in the air at the same time. And I think it was something like 120 or 110 aircraft in the air controlled for, I think it had to be a minimum of like 2 minutes or something like that. So you know that they started out with many more before they finished that. And
Mhm.
if you've ever looked at any of their combats, and I know Joe, I've shown you some of the pictures. You might have looked it up on YouTube, but you've seen some of the videos that I took when I was there, and it's awesome. I mean, when you see 60 planes in the air, all doing ridiculous stuff, all clustered in a clump and flying around and zipping, and knowing that there's only a couple people who are going, "Oh, I lost signal. I got a brownout. Something stomped on my signal." And oftentimes, it's not actually the other transmitters. It might be like a cell tower or some other source of radio frequency noise somewhere else that's needs to be there.
Right.
And it was there before, and we just happen to be flying in that interference wave pattern section where the magic happens, I guess. So, um, so yeah, and that's one of the benefits of these protocols. The bad part is now it's no longer universal. Like you have to buy if you buy a transmitter, you have to buy those receivers. They only work with themselves. You can't say, but I like what they're doing. Like it's really small, it's lightweight. Like you've commented that my Radio Link receivers are like tiny and
Yeah.
they're lightweight.
Super
They weigh,
tiny.
yeah, and they weigh 6 grams. They work great. And I would love it if you could just like go take it, man, use it. But your transmitter does not talk on that frequency or use that protocol. It talks on the
Yeah.
frequency, but it doesn't use the protocol. So tough. Um, I think the only thing that has found a solution around that, which is part of why they've become pretty popular, is the jumper transmitters. Because what they have is a small board that has four multiple chips in the board set, and each of those chips is what generates and uses those protocols and translates them and decrypts them. So you tell it what kind of protocol you want. It takes the stick stuff, it puts it through the appropriate crystal that then sends that to the antenna. And there's a switcher that says which, depending on what you've selected in your transmitter, which of these chipsets it's supposed to use. And
Okay.
so now all of a sudden you fly Sky and Free Sky and Spectrum and Futaba and High Sky all at once, which also means you can then, and it's also a lot of the toy grade and I'll call it low end hobby grade stuff. So when you buy a toy drone, it'll oftentimes have a protocol that the jumper has already in its system. So you can actually, instead of using the really low end, I mean, $10 transmitter mess that you might have that comes with the I'll use AirHogs for example. Like AirHogs is not known for top quality RC, but it sure is fun. Um, but if you have a transmitter that you like and it's good quality, you can use that my T16. I can use that to fly the really tiny, almost throwaway drones for $20 because it
Really?
has the protocol and I can connect to the drone. So I can use my regular size transmitter. The good news is that means I've got a lot more resolution because the ones that come with are really tiny. They're almost like old Nintendo system, kind of controllers as far as size
Right.
and just all crammed in there. Like these have a lot more resolution, a lot more definition. So it makes those drones easier to fly. So just little neat. That's basically the only thing that's kind of come along that has shaken some of this protocol world up. Um, and the battle continues, right?
Right.
So, Joe, it sounds like you had a pretty good handle on some of this, some of this radio stuff. But well, if you have any 2 cents to add to this latency thing, we're going to talk about latency. Um,
Okay.
so if you have anything to add, please do. I was looking at it, and I think it used to be there was a gap between, I guess, because a lot of the chipsets and transfers didn't happen as fast as they do now. So you used to have latency was a genuine, perceptible concern. Like you put an input, and it didn't do anything into your plane for a little bit, and then it would, which is cool because before you couldn't at all. Now you can, but it's a gap. That's a big learning curve. Um, Nowadays, when you think about what kind of latency you're dealing with, and a lot of people will tout like how small a latency. My radio link is like 9 millisecond. You know, I'm not misquoting it. It's like 4 second latency, ultra low latency. And then you're like, oh wow, that's great. And you go to different channels. Oh, it's 15 millisecond. You're like, oh, that's much worse, right? Well, think about it this way, right? You have radio waves travel at the speed of light. So when you put your input in, it travels at the speed of electricity through all the gates and chips and all that stuff, gets transferred into a radio wave, which emits at the speed of light to your about what 1,000 feet or something like that, which ends up being about like was it like a microsecond, which is 1 millionth of a second.
Yeah. When you were originally putting the show notes together, I looked at your speed notes and all, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
"That's not right. Speed of light's way faster than that." And just in my mind, when I was seeing your number, which was 186,283 miles per second, being the speed of light, I was looking at it, that's so much faster than that. What? No, I'm used to seeing light listed as miles per hour, so it's
or,
way like that's a big number. But with bringing it
or
down to
meters.
seconds,
Yeah,
right, or
I've also
meters.
seen it meters per second too,
Yeah, I think
and
we
that's
really track it as meters
mhm,
for the mathematics and all. But yeah, 186,283 miles per second is speed of light. Now
yep,
that's speed of light in a vacuum, so
right,
atmospheric interference and all. But that's what you're getting. Which then, yeah, for your 1,000 foot
hmm,
distance example, that's a microsecond of
right.
travel time, which in doing the research, I pulled the numbers, and that's a microsecond is 10 to the minus 6 or 0.0000001. It's five zeros in front of the one. So that's a microsecond. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's a microsecond. No, that's great. So, so what you end up when you all of these boil down to it, they end up having basically a latency of anywhere between like 14 and about 40 milliseconds is the ballpark, right? And you're like, oh, geez, that's a big bump. Oh, it's a huge swing. I totally want the one that's got 14. But you got to take it into consideration that there's another thing in between the transmitter and stuff that happens, and that's called you. And
Mm-hmm.
humans aren't known really to be that terribly fast. Honestly, sometimes I wonder how we made it in this world. I don't even know as a species. But our reaction time is on average around 200 milliseconds, which is like 10 times slower. And I honestly, well, we kind of can tell the difference between 14 and 40 milliseconds. That's really where you start hitting the threshold where you start noticing is that 40 milliseconds. You may be able to tell the difference between a 10 and a 40 millisecond, but really, good luck. You're certainly not going to be able to react appropriately. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but when you're doing something like racing and you're doing FPV and a bunch of other things like that, and we've talked about latency regarding those things, that you are sending a transmission based on a camera sees something translates that into an electromagnetic signal, transmits it on 5.8 gigahertz. It goes to your goggles, right? It makes an image. You see the image. You process the image, react to it with your thumbs, that then transmits that into the sticks, which sends it at 2.4 gigahertz to the craft you're flying, and then that translates it, and that 14 seconds later, or 14 milliseconds or 40 milliseconds later, to an actual control stick movement, like an actual control surface movement. That latency can start to add up. And you do start noticing a difference between 10 millisecond latency or it's more like the 10 to 40 you barely notice, but some of the FPV footage can get to like 60, I think, and even 80 millisecond. And it's crazy, but you can actually tell the difference. It starts making an impact once you get past that 40 millisecond range.
Hmm.
But you also have to understand you're looking at the latency from camera to eyeball, process it, send it to the sticks, send it out to your craft. And that loop has to be small enough for you to make adjustments and race, hit gates, and not crash into stuff. Like it has to be small enough where you're actually reacting to what's happening, not to by the time that signal got to where it's supposed to go, you missed that gate like 100 feet back. Sorry, dude. And
Right.
you're looking at like it's not far. I mean, when you're traveling at 100, again, told you I was going to look it up and I didn't, but like 100 miles an hour, which isn't unreasonable for a high-end race quad, and your distance between gates is maybe 100 feet. Um, the reaction time, the latency starts to become very important. It makes a difference. But when we're dealing with most of the stuff on the flying field, like we're never gonna see that. We're not even gonna care. It's rare that it actually becomes an issue. It's only when you're actually approaching the ground that you might even notice or care. And even then, for the most part, you probably won't even know. Um, so when you're looking at that kind of, so let's kind of take the latency concern off the table when you're looking at transmitters. Like if you're going to select one for yourself, um, you got all the different protocols, and we'll go through what you got to do with those. But like as far as latency, they're going to hype how quick their thing is. And unless you're doing high-end racing and you're trying to be the world champ, don't worry about it. Channels. Pay attention to how many channels your transmitter can handle, or more importantly, how many channels the receivers typically have. Um, but keep in mind what you're trying to do with your RC hobby, right? If you're using it for cars and boats, you have throttle and you have direction, and that's it. You need 2 channels, maybe 3. And if you're trying to do something exciting like have lights, or maybe you have a dump truck, or maybe have an ejection seat, or I don't know, maybe there's a chum dumper for a boat you have, right? You want to get some fish near your stuff, so you send the boat out and it dumps all the chum in the water, so that way wherever you have your bobber or whatever you're
Is that
doing,
a thing?
the fish go there. Hmm?
I said, is that a thing?
Oh yeah, baby. Yeah, when
Oh,
you're a serious fisherman, that's for reals.
I mean, there was a time, but no.
Yeah, that
This
time
is
passed for
news
me a
to
long
me.
time too. Yeah,
Okay.
but apparently, yeah, it's a thing. I mean, if you look at RC boats, you'll see that it seems like about 20% of them um, are these chum boats,
Okay.
where they literally have a bucket and you put your stuff on top and then it dumps when you get to where you want. But
Hmm.
some of them are really sophisticated. They'll actually have range finding and they'll have fish finders and stuff in the RC boat, like you would in a regular sized boat. Like, so you can go out and figure out where everything's at, throw the chum in the water, and then cast out to it.
Interesting.
But yeah, I don't know. It's more involved than I ever want. But anyway, so think about how many channels you're going to use. Gliders use 2 to 3 channels if you have a motor, but usually it's typically just 2 channels. It's got an elevator and a rudder. Um, but obviously you can have more. Planes typically are 3 to 4. If you have 4 channels, it means you're adding ailerons. Sometimes that expands if you want to have 2 separate controls for the ailerons and then use them for flapper runs. Um, you can get more advanced when you want gears and flaps and things like that. So you're going to add a couple channels with that. And then if you're like me and you really want to do all the crazy stuff, and I've got that Veritech fighter from when I was a kid watching Robotech going, I want to build one of those. Well, that's like a VTOL actuated transforming thing. It's anyway, the idea was flaps, separate channels, ailerons, separate channels, definitely gear. I definitely want gear. Everybody wants gear. And then, of course, there's directional thrust. So I need a thruster thing for that. But I wanted the legs to come down and have it be like a hover. So as a gear walker is what it was called, the mode. So then I'm gonna need another channel for that, maybe two, because I want them to act independently. Oh yeah, and then I want lights because I mean, the cockpit all lit up, that'd be awesome. Yeah, and then
Right?
there's yeah, and then I'm like, oh, retractable gear, right? You want okay, so that's like 9 channels.
You forgot throttle.
Oh yeah, independent, right? Differential throttle, so that's 2 more. So all of a sudden I'm like, oh wow, I need like a 10 channel transmitter, right? Which is part of when I was looking. Like you have the low end FR Sky and the low end Fly Sky and stuff. They're going to be about 5, 6 channels. They're typically going to have an extra switch or two, or potentiometer or a pot, which are kind of like a slider, basically.
Right.
And those allow you to do the gears and the throttle cut and flap movement and stuff like that. You always want a couple of those, and almost all of them have that. Um, because most of the basic receivers are 6 channels, unless you're doing something for RC cars, it'll be 4. Um, that said, I went with the Radio Link because the Radio Link had 10 channels. Actually, it can do up to 12, but it came with a 10 channel receiver, which is kind of wide, but it has dual signals, has dual antennas to receive the signals, which is even cooler. And I mean, it's a full blown Monty. And when I was buying it, you had the Tyrannus X9D, which was everybody's go-to. And honestly, it was a giant for years. It's what most people went to. It's basically the transmitter after yours, the model number after yours. Um, and so it had 10. So that was the next thing you want to look at when you're looking at your receiver. Make sure it has the switches you kind of want, right? Oh, I forgot. But yeah, pen pan tilt. Oh, it's great stuff. Anyway, so make sure you have the switches. Um, see what's on there. Is it an interrupt switch where it's you pull it up, but it springs back to the second position? Is it two? How many 2 position switches? How many 3 position? How many potentiometers? Are there mode buttons? And think about the kinds of things you want to do with it. You definitely want a couple of 3-way switches, or at least a 3-way and a 2-way, a couple potentiometers, um, and the rest is extra. Um, and I mean, you can buy some jets where, wings, leading edge flaps, back flaps, you have lights, you have gears, you have FPV inputs, and a bunch of other stuff. So it can go way up there. And honestly, we're talking low end stuff. When you start getting into giant scale where they've got 16 channel transmitters and all that stuff, it goes on up from there. So all right, so that's switches. Let's see. Not every transmitter has an LCD interface, although most of them do. If you choose to go with a very low end, because you're getting into this and you really only have saved your $40 or whatnot, um, be sure there's at least reverse switches on the transmitter, and there'll be little toggle switches underneath, kind of where the LCD screen goes on most of the other ones. I made the mistake of getting one that doesn't have that. It's like, oh, I can do it. I just have to open up the program and switch it and then save it and then come back out. that's a pain in the butt. You definitely don't want it. It was a bad experience. So, um, let's see.
So on that,
Yeah, what's that?
um, because you're talking about the reverse switches, I assume that's like if you want to flip your elevator or your ailerons.
To go the
Um,
opposite direction, yeah.
right. When and this goes back a couple episodes, but when I was programming or setting up my father-in-law's simple cub, um, it turned out that his ailerons, maybe even his elevator, had been reversed, and that's just due to the way that you hook them up and
Mm-hmm.
all that. Um, Even if they don't have an LCD screen, I don't recall seeing a any sort of switches on the front of it that would have controlled that. When I popped open the user manual on it to look up, hey, can I flip the stuff or do I got to tear this plane apart? There, you are able to go into the programming of your receiver, much like you can go in and program ESC. I was able to go in and connect or put the receiver into a mode that then no, excuse me, correction. I was putting the transmitter into a programming mode
With
that
stick movements, right?
right. It didn't have an LCD screen, but it
Okay.
did have a single red light that
Oh,
I had to put the sticks in, like into like the
yeah.
throttle, the left hand
Lower
stick into
left
top,
or whatnot. Yeah.
yeah, top right, lower right, something. There was a combination of the two sticks that then you turn the transmitter on, and it says, "Oh, you want to go into programming," and then a light starts blinking, and
Okay.
you have the manual open, and based on how many times that light's blinking tells you which setting you're currently working on, and
Okay.
then it has instructions for if you want to go to like if you want to advance to a different setting, then you push on this stick
Okay.
and
Yeah.
it changes how many times it blinks, and then if you want to change that setting, because the blinks also kind of denote what the current setting is, so that push on this other stick and it'll change it, and then it blinks a little differently, saying we're on this setting, but this is what it's currently set to. So even if they don't have the LCD screen, they may still be able to flip certain channels around. They just need to we need to go in and look at the owner's manual on that. And you
Interesting.
can find if you don't have the documentation, if you've lost it or you've got it secondhand, a lot of times you can still
Mm-hmm.
go online, Google it, find a PDF of the operator manual for that transmitter. You can go in and set that stuff if you need.
Okay. That makes good sense. And yeah, if you look at it, if you can't, I mean, I know I went through mine. Mine required a program. And that was the very first one I bought. It got me into the hobby. It quickly almost got me out of the hobby. Which is why I say, and really all I had to do was save or spend an extra 10 or $15, and I would have had probably a transmitter I would have been happy with for a long while. The low end FR Sky and low end FL Fly Skies, they're
Mm-hmm.
inexpensive. I think the Fly Skies are like $55, $60, and they're all the way up to 6 channels. They have everything you need. They really do. Um, and 6 channels will get you through. I think we talked about get you through nearly almost every plane configuration you can have. And if
Mm-hmm.
you don't, there's a way to rig it where you can. Um, so anyway, yeah, that's important. That if it doesn't have it on it, you may have a way to do it through the stick movements. So keep an eye out for that. I know mine didn't, but yeah, I'm not surprised. I forgot that's the way things used to be done before there were fancy LCD screens. Um,
Right.
all right, so the other thing is when you select your transmitter, make sure you pick the right mode, and that can, I mean, it can be fixed, but to fix the mode change from mode one, say, to mode two, mode one is the throttle stick is on the right. So it's going to be factory set. So the right stick is throttle. If you're in the US, almost everything that's mode two, is the throttle stick is on the left. Okay. That's a big difference. And if you've trained yourself to do mode two, Or if you're in the US and you're in a club, somebody hands you a transmitter, you're going to assume it's in mode 2. If you trained your
Hmm.
brain to work with mode 1, you might have a hard time for a little bit and maybe crash a plane. But if you're in the United Europe and somebody hands you a transmitter, be careful. Ask them what mode is it, um, and vice versa. If you're here visiting from from Europe and you're visiting a friend in the States or Australia, I don't even know what they use. I think they use mode 1 for the most part as well. It's really about preference. I think it seems smarter to me to have mode 1 um, be the default. That's probably why it was originally mode 1. I don't know why US started using mode 2. The reason why is most people are right-handed. And when you launch your plane, I like to launch it where I don't feel handicapped. So if I throw anything with my left hand, I'm always feeling very inadequate. If I throw with my right hand, it's a good launch. The problem
Right.
is the only thing I have access to control wise in my US controller mode 2 is throttle and rudder. That is not going to get you out of trouble when you launch your plane.
When you're throwing right hand.
Right, when you're throwing right-handed. Now, if I
Okay.
threw left-handed, I'd have my stick on the elevator and aileron. I could set the throttle at a certain point and leave it there, and then I have my controls already in my hands, ready to go and launch it. That'd be awesome. It would work great if I was a lefty, but I'm not. So mode 1 always seemed to be smart for anybody who's right-handed. But anyway, US mode 2, Europe tends to be mode 1. And if you're a weirdo and want to do it differently, I say that. But honestly, there are a number of pilots who've chosen a different setup that works better for them. And it's really just a configuration of where the main 4 channels sit in your transmitter.
Hmm.
Um, and again, if you can switch them too. It's as simple as changing the mode in your electronics. The problem is the spring settings are different. You actually have to crack open the transmitter to change those. So that's why it's important to kind of set it when you select your transmitter, so that way that part comes set correctly for you. Um, the other thing is when you select your sticks, this is a big item, is whether or not there's Hall gimbals, Hall effect gimbals. And that's basically a style of potentiometer that does not use a contact point. It uses the variation in magnetic field to detect where in the rotation the potentiometer is, and it tends, because there's no direct moving parts that are interacting with each other to wear as far as detection, you tend to have it last longer and it tends to be smoother. So usually you'll have the low end stuff will be a normal potentiometer, and the higher end stuff will typically have Hall effect sensors built in.
Okay.
Um, and I think the difference is about 2 or 3 years. It's almost like a double your lifespan for use on the gimbals. Oftentimes people say, like, look, if you fly often, like every day or every couple days, in a couple years your gimbals will wear out. Like those potentiometers for your sticks will wear, and you will need to replace them. It's not that terrible, but it's something to be considering. Also, how many models can you store? This is a big one. This is what really messed me up. Not messed me up, but basically one of the reasons why I looked at other transmitters after really loving my radio link. Um, how many models can you store and set up in your transmitter? Like I started with the Hobby King 6B, I think, and again, it had one model storage. You went into the program, I think it was like T6 programming thing. You set it up, and that was it. When you disconnected, that's what your thing did. Period. Um, I have the RadioLink A10, AT10, and that can store um, 15 models. I know the Jumper 8 has SG, I think has 45 or 50 models, I think it can store. FR Sky, your Turnigy, right? How many can you store in that?
That one gets 8.
Just right, that's 8. So basically, that's 8 generic setups, I imagine, or 8 individual models.
That'll be
It could be either
That'll
way.
be 8 full setups, as I understand it. I've not had the opportunity to have really 2 or 3 birds at one time that are
Hmm.
fully functional and flying.
That's true.
Um,
Right, you're not there yet.
but my understanding of it is that that would be 8 full setups. Because when I go
Okay.
into that model, I think everything is saved to that model.
Okay. So if you were smart about building and always made sure that your ailerons went a certain way as far as servos are concerned, you could probably set up a 4 channel model, a 3 channel model, and like a differential thrust and something with flaps, right? You could set them up and then and a wing, a flying wing where you have like elevons, right? You basically
Right.
set those 5 or 6 models up, and as long as you, when you build, the servos are going the same way in each model, you can move that receiver out from one plane to the next and build a bunch of different models and still just have the 6, which should work. I think the only thing you might have to do is kind of adjust. Well, if you have a rate switch, you could probably adjust for what's important um, for that kind of stuff. Is there a card? Sometimes there's a storage card, like an SD storage card.
Not to my knowledge.
Hmm.
I
Okay.
haven't seen anything.
I know the T16 has a storage card, and it you can store models on that too. And so if when that's the case, like really, it's as big as your storage card can hold, and the model memory information is very tiny, so it's pretty much unlimited. Um, let's see, the Tyrannus X9, which is it said 60, I think, expendable by memory card, so you can have more if you put the memory card in there. But uh, ultimately, you'll worry about that when you get to that point. Let's worry about getting more planes, then we can worry about how many you can you store, right? And then
Matthew, I want all the
I
planes.
want all the planes. Exactly. Okay, programming. Um, every one of these things is like a microcomputer. At least any of these ones with a LCD screen. And you can set these and customize how these are set up any which way you want. The T16 has the OpenTX, and that is a very robust system, and it to the point where you can actually slow the speed that the servers react, which is great for gear, or if you have a bay door, like doors that open up and you want them to open scale. For me, I don't like my flaps to jerk to the position. I like them to move
Ooh,
slowly because when they move quick, you all of a sudden have your plane start pitching all wild. If they go slower, which is I like to put my before I realized that on the T16, I'd put them on the potentiometer, and I'd rather move the potentiometer at my speed, which can be slow. But with the T16, I don't have to do that. I can set it up to be the rates are 10%, 30%, and 45%, right? Like that's how what angle they're at, let's say. But I have it so that there's like a 5-second delay to get to that. So that way when it comes down, and then it's at the 15, and then go to the next one. So it,
nice.
yeah, yeah. So then when you're flying, it's not herky jerky, right? Um, so there's a lot of neat. I'm not going to get into it. Just know that the programming can be really extensive and it can be pretty daunting, but at the same point, it also allows you to do some pretty intense stuff. Like there's one guy who's like, I don't know, I just hit a switch and it does all of the stuff. Like it opens the doors, it turns on the lights, it brings down the gear, it plays a sound, and then it turns the mixing for throttle and rudder to be a different thing than what it normally does
Yes,
while it's flying.
that is some serious auxiliary channel
It's
mixing setup right there.
right. It's actually a script. I think it's a Lua script.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. It gets some pretty crazy stuff. So, um, another thing to consider when you're looking at transmitters, what powers it? Right? Is it a crud ton of double A's? Is it a lithium
hi,
ion?
that's me.
That's you. A lot of times, if you look at how many double A's or whatever it's using, right, multiply that by 1.5 volts, right, because that's how much each one is. You
Right.
could probably replace that battery pack if you could find the power cord with a rechargeable lithium ion or a lithium polymer. Um, I know
I think
that's
I do want to do that. Not so much because I'm worried about tearing through double A's. Um, but the plastic housing that the batteries set into,
hmm
I've already cracked one of the little roundy bits that kind of help hold the battery in place.
yeah.
One of those already cracked. Like it's not broken completely off, but it's not doing any good.
hmm
Um, and try the little wires that go from the battery pack to the power port on the transmitter. Uh, it's Suffice it to say, it's not the easiest thing in the world to get the battery pack in there
And cram that wire in.
and get the wire in there in such a way that then the back cover is going to go on nicely.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't mind getting a smaller lipo pack
Yeah.
that, and making that conversion.
Right. You've already got the chargers for the RC stuff anyway, so it's not a big deal to have that extra one, right? One of the things when you do that, though, pay attention to how big that compartment is, because um, LiPo battery packs vary in size dramatically for the same capacities. So, and again, when you're looking at that kind of scale, when you're looking at the scale of I need to replace this battery pack, um,
Right.
pay attention to how big that is. Um, all right, so and then last, I think really that kind of covers that's all the basics and it's all the to me it's a lot of information, but it's the core information I think you need to do to make an informed decision when looking at transmitters. And maybe you have one now, think about what you like and what you don't like about it and make sure that those features are or are not accordingly on the next transmitter you choose if you choose another one. And I've heard it time and again listening to different podcasts and talking to different people. And as somebody who's now 3 transmitters in, maybe 4, and 3 years into the hobby, I know they're right, which is this transmitter will last you through whatever plane you buy. It will last you through whatever motor you crash, all the propellers you're going to destroy, um, and it will grow with you as your skill improves. It's one of the things in this hobby that is absolutely and unequivocally worth spending money on. Period. That said, when you're getting into it like I was, and I know Joe was in a similar boat, like I'm not spending a ton of money to see that this stuff sucks.
Right.
Right. And realize like this isn't for me. Like, I'm not going to spend a ton of money on it. Um, so you do want an inexpensive one. But at the same point, spend the X for me. I bought the Hobby King 6B or whatever. It came in at $35. If I had spent $5 more, I would have been able, I would have had far less frustration and had far more success, I think, for a lot longer of a time. I still would have changed transmitters. I still would have bought more advanced ones for sure, but I would have been happy for a long time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I wish I hadn't spent that $35 on the transmitter. I wish I had just waited a week or whatever it was.
Okay. So we're about to get into what are we using. You're talking about the Hobby King 6B. Why don't you go ahead and go through the others that you
Okay.
use, and I'll talk about mine.
All right, good. Well, I started on the Hobby King 6B. It's really basic. It was 6 channel transmitter or 6 channel receiver. There was a couple switches, a potentiometer, um, but there was no reverse. And you had to buy the cable to plug it in your computer to use the T6. I think it was a T6 is what it's called. Like the basically the transmitter protocol that normally is actually like on the more advanced ones. It's in the transmitter and it controls like which way the switch goes. Like, hey, is your receiver going this way or is it going opposite? Um, and if you wanted to mix, you could mix. You could do also even set it up exactly as you wanted. But once it was set up, to go fix it, you had to go. You had to go back home. to the computer or bring the computer with you to the field. Or I think later versions, you could hook it up to your phone and have the program on your phone and use it that way. So it could have been a little bit more versatile, and I think I could still use it. It's not a great transmitter on its best day, but it worked. It got me in the air, and it got me to realize I enjoyed the hobby. So I guess it did its job. Um, I urge somebody to spend more money and, do almost anything else. Um, AT10. I have the Radiolink AT10. I also have the Jumper, sorry, the T8SG or J8SG, and I also have the Jumper T16. Jumper T16 is probably my latest purchase. The Jumper 8, I purchased because I had a handful of drones, a handful of like off the shelf things, and they were using Spectrum, I think, protocols typically. And I couldn't, I mean, none of them came with Radio Link stuff. So, and I also had a bunch of Eachine E010s, and it said that model could connect to them, and I could fly them with that transmitter. So I was excited about that. It was
Nice.
enough of a push where I was like, okay, I'll do it. And I haven't been unhappy with it, and it's cool because now I can use it as my buddy box. It's smaller, and I was thinking about it when I bought it, it would be better sized for my kids' hands because these transmitters
Hmm.
are pretty big. They're good
Yeah.
for adult hands, but for little kids, man, that's a long stretch for your thumb to go to the center. So the jumper is kind of like a 3/4 scale transmitter almost, and it's good for little kids. So um, on the T16, it runs OpenTX, which is the same thing that the Tyrannus 9, the Tyrannus 9XD ran, um, and it's just got all the bells and whistles, and it works great. And it has multi-protocol, and it has an internal multi-protocol module, so I can actually have long-range module, the L9M, well, LR9M, and the multi-protocol all on the same transmitter, so I don't have to jockey with pulling out transmitter pack things and switching them out. So it's a good purchase, and they've certainly continued to advance technologies. And I'm sure a year and a half from now, I'll look at the T16 going, "You're awesome, but boy, there's that really cool one out." Um, but in the meantime, I'm really enjoying it. There's a lot to learn, and I've only scratched the surface. I'm excited to start learning how to use the scripting and stuff to be able to do some pretty cool things with the models I'm excited to build. What about you, Joe?
Right.
You've got something on your end. What do you do? What do you use?
Yeah. So I'm using I know it as the Turnigy 9X
Mm-hmm.
in preparation for this episode. And then looking at the bottom, it says the FSTH9X, which is uh, the FR Sky, Free Sky. So Free Sky model
Mm-hmm.
Turnigy 9X. It's a 9 channel.
Mm-hmm.
This was what was in the kit that I got from you that you got from
Mm-hmm.
the fellow. Um, Now I was curious to see if this one was even still available
It is.
because
Yeah, surprisingly.
yeah, for some reason I thought that it wasn't, but it is because I was looking while we were talking, and at least Hobby King has it. It's a $75 transmit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've heard mixed reviews on it. That said, I've enjoyed the mess out of it.
Yeah.
It's more than I need right now. Um, and yeah, like it's more than I need right now, but I'm growing into it. I'm figuring out what the various things do. It's got a couple nice built-in features that I assume most transmitters of this rate or higher have. So like we were talking about the throttle kill earlier. I've got a throw switch dedicated to that. I just have to go into the menus and
Mm-hmm.
set it up. So when I flip that switch, it just completely
Right.
kills my throttle,
Yep.
which I have like once I plug in my batteries and such, and I've got the plane powered up. I'm still doing pre-flights and balancing some things, and so I always just flip that switch up because you know yeah, anybody's belly can hit that throttle, but
Mm-hmm.
I have a habit of bumping that throttle stick. And
Mm-hmm.
then I don't know if yours have like dedicated switches for elevator and aileron reduction for reduce modes. The
No, I mean it's just a series of two two channel switches or three channel switches. The radio link has two potentiometers in the center. Same with the T16. Same with the jumper. Um, the yeah, I mean other than the trim switches,
okay, so
they've all got at least a couple of each of those switches. The T16 has 1, 2, 4, 8, 10 plus 6 mode switches and the whole thing. It's an awful lot of switching going on that thing.
yeah, I was just curious. I know I've got two switches that are specifically for handling throw reduction, and I've so one's for elevator, one's for aileron, and then that's what I had my throw reduction set up on for planes that need throw reduction,
Mm-hmm.
or if I want a plane set up like I had the Fogey set up for uh, I'm just piddling around and I'm doing normal, or I'm launching, so I don't want a whole lot of big movements. I'll start my flight out with my throws reduced, and then once I get up there and I'm ready to go, then I can open those throws on up.
You're ready to have a
Um,
couple accidents.
yeah, right. It's and there's just a lot of other buttons and switches on here that
Yeah.
it does have the buddy system.
Yep.
I believe because I've got the aux on the back, so I guess potentially we could hook this one up
Mm-hmm.
to one of yours and
Yeah.
do the
Yeah, we,
buddy.
yeah, we should be
And
able to. I've got a couple, the same kind of trainer cords. So when you do the sim pops into the trainer port in the back. And so
right,
I have a bunch of the linkages. So I should be able to connect your trainer port to that aux cable that I have that goes between mine, and they should be able to talk.
okay.
We'll see.
Um,
We can test it.
well, next time I get up there, sooner or later. Um,
You train me how to
and
land.
the the only the only difficulty I've had with it so far is one of the planes, and it might have been the glider I was building way back. I wanted to set up uh, three three levels of flaps, so I needed
Hmm.
a four position switch, and I have one. I think I have one four position switch on this.
Oh,
Nope, that's right.
you need a two and a three.
That, yeah, I need a three position switch because I wanted two positions of flaps. I don't have a four position switch. I have a three position. I just grabbed.
Well, one of the
Um,
positions is normal, right?
right, normal, and then one two. But what I was wanting it to do, and we talked about at that time. I was having to go in and try to go into channel mixing and how
Mm-hmm.
set up uh, you know slave channels because that was an aux channel,
Mm-hmm.
and it was I never did figure that one out. It's possible that I could figure it out, but it's not something I need right this second. I've got um, there's potentiometer knobs on the top that I can handle flaps with, but
Okay.
this one is capable of moving to OpenTX, so this does not have OpenTX on it. It's got Turnigy's or
Mm-hmm.
FreeSkies on it, but I can at some point in the future flash the OpenTX onto it, and I've been very good in not jumping the gun and immediately flashing new firmware on it because I don't need it. I just
This
I
works
need to
like
get my
it
feet wet
is.
first. It does work like it is. There's no
Yeah.
reason to go to OpenTX right now, other than it's OpenTX. Why would I not want to like? It's not even that I know that much about OpenTX, other than I know that it's supposedly better, and I can like there's modifications I can make on my transmitter. Let's do this.
Wait, what? Let's
So,
do it.
yeah, but no, I've done good in not doing that, and honestly, With that one being a 9 channel, that's as much as I'm going to need for
Yeah,
really the foreseeable future, because that does give me the ability to put lights and such like that on the plane.
right. Yeah, I mean that's differential thrust, gears, flaps, lights. That's 4 channels there.
Hmm.
Um, onto the normal 4, you're at 8, and that also allows for a bomb drop.
Right. And so, sort of the takeaway I would say from this whole conversation, uh, this whole episode, but especially when it comes to looking at which transmitter you're wanting, is look at the transmitter you look at the transmitter you want now, and add a little more to it. I'm very glad that I did not pick up, good as they are for what they are. I'm sure. I'm glad that I didn't pick up just a very simple 6 channel, you know, my sticks and then a couple extra things. Like this transmitter has room for me to grow into it
Hmm.
over the next couple years. Really, like
Yeah,
I could go, I could fly for many years and not need a different transmitter,
yeah.
other than I want to get fancier and have other stuff. But so look at what you're wanting to do now. Maybe not even what you're doing, but what you want to do now, and add a couple more layers to that and go for that. Like buy one
Hmm.
that you're going to grow into,
Hmm.
not one you're going to outgrow in a year.
Yep.
Because it's money, but it's money that you're going to spend once versus
For
having.
4 years of flying or 5 years of flying, I mean you're unlikely to run through your transmitter and need one for 3 or 4 years in the hobby, if not longer, depending on how you fly. Like if
Mm,
this is somebody who's, I'll call it a YouTuber, who's flying at least, you know, 2 or 3 days of their week. And I mean, by days, I mean like that's their job. So 2 of their days are spent with that transmitter all day long. Um, then they'll run out of it in 3 years. Like for you and I, Joe, weekend warriors at on the best of days. And most of the time, every other weekend we'll get out. Um, we won't need it. We'll want something far more than we need it, far
right.
sooner than we need it. So, um, yeah. Oh, goodness.
So with all that out of the way, uh, workbench time. Matthew, what you got on yours?
That little plane, that little squat plane, I want to fix that up and get that flying. The propeller ate the snot out of it. I'm gonna fix that because it was
Okay.
it was close. So that's exciting. I painted the Spitfire basic colors, like yellow on top, blue on the bottom, and kind of a blue pattern to cover some of the fuselage. I'm my plan was to detail that out with a bunch more masking, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
probably take care of that. And I'll probably also I've got a 3D printer, so I'm gonna print out like engine exhaust ports, and I've got gear printed, so I'm probably going to attach that. See if we can't get that gear running with the tail wheel and all that kind of stuff. So we'll bring it up a level, or I'll build another one and put it in that, because it's a good plane. And if Quinn and Logan both continue their path of being way better pilots than I was in a week, for them, it took them a week to get as good of a pilot as it took me to be in a year and a half. That's me just being jealous. Honestly, I'm really proud of him. I'm excited
Yeah,
for
but
him.
you didn't have somebody sitting there with a buddy box
No,
training.
no, that helps a lot. Um, uh, yeah, so I recognize that, but the idea is I'm hoping to them to be at a point where they can fly on their own in a couple months from now, and with that will come we're going to need all these transmitters now. And we'll be able to fly each, Spitfires and Mustangs and Zeros and all sorts of stuff and have combats with, bomb drops and whatever. We'll hopefully have a lot of fun with it. I'm anticipating.
Nice.
But the idea is to paint up that Spitfire the rest of the way, to get that kind of patterning I was looking for. And I have I'll call it my two six my 2 4-foot projects. I've got the jet that I mentioned about before. I'm going to put landing gear in. I found landing gear to put in it. Now I need to kind of install like a mounting plate for it, because otherwise the gear will just kind of rip out of the foam. And then this Viking, I will, by the time we talk next, this is a promise, not a threat. I will have the back landing gear in and the nose gear installed. And with any luck, maybe when you come up, we can do the maiden together.
Nice.
Yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. I hope we can do that. So those are that. I think that fills up enough of my workbench.
Mm-hmm.
What about you? What are you working on? What's your hope?
So well, yeah, hope at this point. So really just Spitfire. I hadn't had a chance to put anything on the bench yet, and the bench is currently covered.
Yeah.
What am I doing? I gotta clean my bench off and then tape all the plans together and start cutting parts. But,
Okay.
hopefully I can get some time and get it built. And if I do, then
Good.
I'll try to come up and we can fly this weekend.
Yeah, I hope so. Honestly, I know if you do that, if you manage to get to that point, and you can come up, we're gonna have a lot of fun. We're gonna have a lot
Yeah.
of fun. And I think we're not really sure what the next topic will be, but it's quite possibly talking about where you should go and fly or how you should fly. It's something we kind of talked about as a piece of everything else we're talking about, but I think it's important to talk about essentially being good stewards of the hobby and making sure you're flying in a manner and in a place that isn't going to really isn't going to basically make the news. You know, in a bad
Yeah.
way. And make sure that nobody gets hurt. Obviously, I don't think anybody who's in this hobby is not looking to hurt anybody. So, yeah, I think that might be one of our next topics. We might luck out and we might have a guest. We might turn sideways and do something completely different. So, keep listening and you'll find out.
All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for tuning in and listening. As always, we'd love to hear any feedback or whatever you've got going on. Feel free to email us at aviationrcnoob@gmail.com, or you can come by and look at the Facebook page and leave any feedback or comments there. We've got links to all that in the description. And Matthew, if there's nothing else.
Nope, nothing.
All right. Well, guys, thanks again, and we will see you next time.
All right, bye.